So this is what we're making. A spinner ring using the anticlastic inner ring. And with this one we have hearts on the band on the outside and hearts on the band on the inside. The primary ring is 9 millimeters wide and 0.7 of a millimeter thick. Now I'm making a size M ring, which is 16.73 inside diameter, plus 0.7 times 3.14 gives me 54.73 millimeters. So I'm just going to dial it up on my calipers. And you may as well dial it up exactly. Place that on the bench peg so that it doesn't shift around. Drag the back across and it'll give you a nice mark to cut to. Now I'm just going to chop this off with my shears and leave it slightly long so that I can file back to that mark. If you cut it with your saw, it makes a lot nicer cut, but I'm being lazy. So now, be sure you hold your file nice and flat. And this is a Swiss number 2 cut, flat hand file. You can check the material against the side of your file to make sure it's the right size, and I left my calipers set at the proper size so that I can measure fairly quickly. Pretty close. Okay, we're on the money. Now, this needs to be annealed because I'm going to stamp it so that I can have marks on the inside. And we'll just bring it up to a dull red. I just have it sitting on a hard charcoal block. And just be sure that you don't have any flux underneath the piece, otherwise it'll leave marks on it. So just a dull red. By the time you get your torch shut off, the dull red will have disappeared. And then we just quench this in water and dry it off. Now, I haven't pickled it because it's not necessary at this point. Now I'm going to use a punch that's heart-shaped that I made out of an old center punch. And I'm just going to hold a bench block on my lap on a piece of timber, and I'm going to use my chasing hammer. I'll shift this down so you can see. So I'm just going to randomly put a fairly deep impression and shifting around and turning the punch as I go because I don't want all of the hearts lined up. You can see it's going to leave a fairly deep impression, and that's what I want. So don't hit the very edge and don't hit the very end. So I have my pattern, and this is going to be the inside. So I'm going to hallmark in between the hearts where it'll still be soft or not work hardened. And then we'll check our length because it will have stretched a bit from our hammering. So I'm just going to flatten this out with my rawhide hammer, because to measure it, it actually needs to be flat to give you a correct measurement. And I still have my vernier calipers set, and that's about 1.5 millimeters too long, so that's good. So we'll just file back and be sure to hold your file flat, otherwise you'll be filing either a rounded pattern or an angle. It's nice and flat, about another millimeter. So now my length is correct, but because I've hammered all of this, it's work hardened, so we need to anneal it again before we try to form it into a ring. So I've annealed it again and quenched it. Now, keep your heart on the inside on this. Flat half-round pliers, never squeeze the very end. And just bend it into an oval until your ends fit together perfectly. Any twist, take out, because the better the fit, the easier your life will be, because it'll mean less cleanup. So take your time, get it as close as you can get it. Now, I have everything really close except I have a little gap. So I'm going to use my ring bending pliers to go opposite the join. Just give it a little squeeze, turn it around, do the other side, little squeeze, and you can see that the gap closed right up and it's ready to solder. So I'm just going to hold this in my third hand, joint up, mix up your flux, and I'm just putting a line of flux right on the join, top and bottom, and I'm going to use a 2 millimeter long piece of hard solder and place it across the join. And we'll have a nice neutral flame. Dry out the flux. Don't heat the bottom of the ring where it's clamped. And you can see I shifted the solder over with my solder pick. So I'm just circling the join. The flux will go clear there, and the solder will flow. And it happens just that quickly. And underneath, now we'll quench it in water. Have a look at the inside, and we should see a nice fine solder line on the inside. That's exactly what we want. So now we'll pickle it. Now, I haven't pickled it yet. I did round it up on my ring mandrel, And what I want to do at this point is take my sanding stick with 400 grade sandpaper on it, and I want to just go over the whole ring to give it a flat satin finish like this, because we have the impression on the other side of where we did our stamp. So I want to get the ring so that it's nice and flat. So you can see how it's not quite flat. So go ahead, take your time, sand it until you have a nice satin finish over the whole ring. And just hold it in your fingers. Now when you have a nice satin finish all the way around, we can measure the outside of the ring. Check that your calipers are zeroed before you start. So an average is about 1820. So the material is still 0.7 of a millimeter thick. So 1820 plus 0.7 times 3.14 equals 59.40. So once again, I'll just dial this up on my calipers. Make sure your metal is flat. Mark it. And I'm just going to cut it with my shears. And this time I'm going to cut it right on the line, because I'm going to stamp this one and we know it's going to grow a little bit. So I need to anneal this first. And I'm going to polish the outside of this ring, because once we put the outer ring on, we're not going to be able to do anything. So I'll polish it now. So my little outer ring metal is annealed. And once again, I'll just put it on my bench block. And I'm going to just stamp a line of hearts down the middle and turning the punch as I go. And once again, I'm not going to stamp the very end, and I left this slightly long because I know I'm going to have to cut it. So I still have my caliper set to size, and we'll just straighten this out because it's still annealed in between the heart marks. And I've just put my mark in, and because it is about 1.5 millimeters, I'm going to use my shears again, leaving a little bit plus the line so that I can just file back to it. And I'll check my calipers. And we want to leave this slightly big because we want it to move. So perfect. And my flat half-round pliers. And this one, we want the hearts on the outside. So the half-round goes on the inside. Same old story. Bring the ends together as perfectly as you can. And in this case, I'm going to use parallel jaw pliers to give it a bit of a squeeze. And that will usually take the twist out. And this one's small enough and thin enough you can just use your fingers. So get it as perfect as possible. In this one I'm going to put joint down and put my solder on the inside. About 1.5 mm long piece. Place it with your flux brush. Neutral flame. Dry out your flux. And then I'm just brushing the flame back and forth. The flux will go clear and the solder will flow. Always happens that way. Now, I'm not going to put the flame on the outside to draw it that way because it should have flowed through. So I'll have a look. And it did. So I can see the solder join on the outside, and that's good enough. So now we'll pickle it. So once it's pickled, inspect your solder join. It should be perfect. If it's good, slip it on your ring mandrel, round it up with your rawhide hammer. Now this is sterling, so it shouldn't stretch with the rawhide. Tidy up your join with the sanding stick. And it shouldn't take but a few passes with the sandpaper if you did the join correctly. That's all it took. Check that the ring is straight, that it's not potato chip shaped. If you need to straighten it a bit, you can just use your chasing hammer and the rawhide mallet on your steel bench plate. Do it both ways. Done. Now I'm going to put a gentle curve in this using a dapping punch. So just a slight curve to make sure that it fits the curve of the original ring. So I oxidized the ring, and I'm just going to go over it lightly with a piece of 400 grade sandpaper so that I can leave the dark part inside. It'll be a satin finish, but that's okay because the ring itself is highly polished. So I'm just going to lightly sand the whole ring. And then we check to make sure that it fits our original ring, because we want it slightly bigger so that it will move. So that's what I want. So now we'll just round the corners of this a bit using a doming punch and we'll be done. So just dome the one side, flip it over, dome the other, and we don't want a big curve. We just want enough of a curve to hold it in place. So that's it. We're finished. Now I'm not going to polish the inside. I'm just going to whiz it up using 400 grade sandpaper on my split mandrel. So that's it. So now I have a satin finish band with hearts on the outside on a polished main ring. And then on the inside, I've got another set of hearts.